Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. Now in this episode the main feature is going to be this Hornby 42XX tank that's been sent in to me by a chap called Robert, who reported very intermittent running and problems with it running in general. But at the end of this episode I'm also going to detail a bullied Pacific that I did up for a chap called Neil. Now the reason that's at the end of this will be explained later, but the main focus is going to be this Great Western 280 tank. Now having a look at it, it's DCC fitted, and Roberts obviously stripped it down. Now there are a couple of bags of bits. There's a spare motor and the pony wheel in there, and then all manner of bits in this bag. So we'll have a look at those in a bit. But I'm going to put this on the track and give it a battery test. It's fitted with a Liaise DCC decoder, which normally work on on DC, but it's not showing any signs of life with the battery test. So there's obviously something wrong, either with the decoder itself or with the pickups. Now looking underneath, the pickups do look to be pretty mangled on this model, and not many of them are touching the wheel backs. So somebody's obviously tried to have a look at this in the past. Now I'm going to remove the base plate to have a look at these pickups, and this is held in place by quite a few screws, to be honest, probably too many. It's a bit over engineered, but once all these screws are removed, the base plate will lift away, revealing the state of the pickups. So once I get that back screw out, which proved to be pretty difficult. Yeah, as I thought, the pickups are all bent out of shape, they're all mangled, and some of them aren't even touching the wheel back, so they're all going to need to be adjusted. In fact, the ones at the back have probably snapped in the past, and this one here is made up of solder. There's also quite a lot of dirt and fluff on the pickup, so that will all need to be cleaned away. There's a lot of fluff and dirt on this model, but disappointingly there's no bearings. The axles again on this model just sit in the die-cast chassis. But they look clean enough, but the pickups, like I said, are pretty mangled. This may be the problem as to why it's not running very well. And these back ones here, well, they've been built up with solder, but they are pressed right into the plastic keeper plate. They're not actually springy anymore. So we're going to have to look and see if we can rectify that. And there's all this white fluff everywhere. I think this might be off a cotton bud. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut the wires now where the solder joint is for this decoder, because I want to strip it down and I want to be able to test this away from those mangled pickups. I'll resolder the joint later on, but with that out of the way, I can remove this base plate because it's been soldered and hardwired in. But with that cut, I can remove that out of the way and get a proper look and work on it without the wheels being in the way. So I'm also going to remove the motor, and to do that you have to remove these 6 tiny screws. There are 2 in this rear keeper for the motor and then 4 in the gearbox cover itself, and they really are tiny screws. If I lost them on the floor in the carpet, I'd have no chance of getting them back. And then these ones on the gearbox cover reveal a motor setup that I've not actually seen before, where the flywheel is actually part of the motor worm, and I've never seen that before on a motor, ever. But the chassis itself is free rolling enough, so I've not got no issues with that. But yeah, this flywheel fitted worm gear, I've never seen a motor like that. So I take this bit of masking tape off the decoder, and then I find the problem. Looking at the decoder, on the top of it it's fine, but on the rear, I don't know how good it picks it up on the camera, but it's actually melted through the insulation, so the decoder is actually dead. So we're going to have to fit a new decoder for this for Robert. So now I've stripped off that old decoder and the wiring, and a battery test on the motor proves that the motor is running nice and fine. So it could have been just a case of a poorly decoder that was causing the intermittent running, and eventually the decoder's just given up. So turning my attention to the chassis, using a cotton bud of methylated spirits, I'm going to clean all the old oil and lubrication off this, ready to apply some fresh stuff. The original Hornby oil had congealed slightly, so I remove all that with this cotton bud, and then I'm also going to clean the wheels and the wheel backs while I'm at it, while I've got easy access, to make sure that when I reassemble this model everything is as clean as it can possibly be, to give it the best chance of running with those pretty dodgy pickups. Now, turning my attention to the pickup plate, I'm going to try and remove as much dirt and try and manipulate these pickups back into their original shape as much as I can. I could buy a brand new spare part, but if I do that, it's just going to bump the price up for Robert, who already has agreed for me to buy a new decoder. So I don't want to buy loads of parts and bump the price up too much. Otherwise, if you do that, it can sometimes become a bit uneconomical and cost more than what the model's worth. So now everything's been tidied up, I'm going to apply some fresh oil to the axles. Only a small amount using this pin dropper, just enough to lubricate it, because the axles sit in that die casting, so they will need some lubrication, otherwise they will wear out the casting over time. And then I'm going to apply a small amount of Labelle on that drive gear. Now, before putting the keeper plate back on, the front pony wheel is put on, as this is held in place by the chassis keeper plate. So if I screwed this down, I'd only have to remove it later. The wires were threaded through the holes in the diecast chassis, and then the pickups are manipulated behind the wheel backs. Now, I have tried to manipulate these pickups to rub on the wheel backs, but further adjustment will be required after I've screwed this keeper plate back on. The problem is with the Hornby brass they use, or phosphor bronze, whatever it is, for these pickups, it is very, very thin and can snap very easily, so you have to work very carefully with this. But once all the pickups are behind the wheels, I retighten all the screws that we undid earlier. And there are a few too many. I mean, there's 4 just to take the base keeper plate off. That does seem a bit overkill if you ask me. So now the chassis is all back together. The front pony wheel is back where it should be. The wheel treads are given a final polish, because even though I cleaned them earlier, they still look a bit grimy. And you can see there the cotton bud is picking up some dirt off the wheel treads. And then I'm now just manipulating these pickups again, now that the chassis plates, and just make sure they're in contact with all the wheels. So once that's all done, I'm now going to refit the motor. Now this will only go in one way. The holder is designed so that the motor fits in like that with the flywheel. Turn it, make sure everything's good, and then apply again a small amount of grease to the worm gear itself, and that will work its way through the drivetrain and keep this well lubricated for years to come. I also put a small amount of oil on the motor bearings there, and where the flywheel runs in that diecast chassis, and then the gearbox cover plate is replaced, as is the rear motor bracket. That's also put back in. So now everything's back in place. I'm going to hold it with the rear here. Battery test. The wheels are turning nicely, so the gear train is all engaged correctly. And I'll just leave that running for a few seconds, and that will spread that Labelle 106 grease through the drivetrain and ensure everything is correctly lubricated. Now, having a look through the bag of bits that Robert supplied, we've got a couple of figures there. I assume he wants those fitted as a driver and fireman. That is the old DCC interface bracket, which has been removed from the model for some reason, and the model's hardwired. That's part of the pickups from the chassis plate. So this model has been modified. I don't quite know why they would have took the interface out, but they decided to hardwire it. So that's what I'm going to do now, and I've hardwired a brand new A models decoder to the model. And I really do like these A models decoders. And now testing the battery on the wheel, you can see everything's running as it should. So again, with so many of these modern models, the die-cast weight in the boiler has a slot for the decoder. The decoder goes in, and then it's a case of fitting the body shell back on and trying not to trap any wires, manipulate the wires around until the chassis clips back in place. Now there was a screw missing. The screw hole there under that driving wheel The screw for that was missing, so I had to find one out my spares box. But the screw for the front that secures the front under the smoke box was present. So this was placed in and tightened up, and then the model was handled gently until I got a spare screw out of my spares box. Now the cab roof was easy to remove. It was only held in place with a small amount of glue. So I've removed it for ease of fitting a driver and fireman that Robert supplied. And for the squeamish of you, you probably want to look away now because these guys need a bit of surgery. And all I do is, using a scalpel, I remove the base. I don't remove any limbs, just the base to free them up, and then a small amount of Loctite superglue on the base of their shoes with the aid of my tweezer nose pliers. And I don't keep dropping the poor chap. He stood in the cab until the glue cures, and then I've fitted the driver and fireman to the model. The cab roof was then again put back in place with a couple of small dots of superglue, so that if it ever needs to come off in future, it can do. I didn't overdo it with the glue at all. And once it's in place, it's just held in place until the glue cures. This stuff cures pretty quick, and the thing I like about the Loctite glue is it doesn't leave any white bloom if used correctly. If you use too much, it will do. But at very small amounts like this, it's very good for this sort of thing. And one of the last things to do is to fit the NEM couplings back on. And then it's on to the test track with a battery test, and all is back together and it's running beautifully. Now this is really nice model, this 280 tank. I've never seen or worked on one of these before, and I really do like these. I'm going to have to keep an eye out for one of these. I wouldn't mind a Great Western green one for the Garden Railway. It's a very nicely detailed model, this, and it's got that lovely classic Great Western look about it. So again, it's outside in the glorious weather onto the Garden Railway, hauling a lengthy coal train for what these tank engines were built for. If you've got anything you'd like to see featured on Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look and get it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. So I'm going to leave the tank engine running around the garden with a lengthy rake of coal hoppers, and then I'll get it sent back to Robert. So stick around. After the running session with the Great Western tank, I will detail the Battle of Britain class that I repaired for Neil. So I think you'll agree that Great Western tank is an absolutely fantastic little runner. Now, I mentioned earlier that this Battle of Britain class, Winston Churchill, was sent in by Neil. Now, unfortunately, all the footage of me repairing this model was corrupt. It played okay on the iPhone, but when I transferred it to a computer or indeed iMovie, it would not edit or play. So the only thing I have of it is the Winston Churchill running around the garden. Now, this was sent to me by Neil, who said that when it was running, it was losing traction, wouldn't go around corners, and was intermittently cutting out and locking up. Now, the model had a lot of work done to it. The wheels were slightly out of quarter. The loco has been modified in the past, and it's actually had a lot of running, and the chassis was worn, allowing the plastic axle keepers to move. So I packed these out with a little bit of plasticard, and eventually, after several hours of working on this model, got it to run satisfactorily with no locking up, and as you'll see here, hauling a 4-car rake, including a heavy Pullman car on the back. It actually ended up being quite a superb runner. It is just very unfortunate that I lost all the footage of this being mended. So here you can see the Battle of Britain in the garden running at slow speed, just to make sure that there's no binding or locking up of the wheels, which there wasn't. And obviously I kept Neil up to date with this model, because honestly, when I did this, and it's a shame the footage was lost, I thought this was going to be the model that would beat me because of how worn the chassis was. It took some doing to get this model to actually run satisfactorily. But I did it, and it's running in the garden here under test, light engine, backwards and forwards, and on train. So thank you again for watching Trash to Track. Please like, share and subscribe. And I'll leave you now with some shots of the Battle of Britain going through its paces, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye for now.